room.
I guess we could just, once some people are here, check if they hear us loud and clear.
Mm-hmm.
And I should mute my own stream. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The sound does work.
nice, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just wait 1 more minute so some people show up, and then we'll start with the presentation. Welcome everyone.
Excellent. Welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to talking to you all soon.
Okay, I'd say let's just start with the introduction so people won't miss anything important, but we also don't keep anyone waiting. Not that we are not important, but the actual content is a more important thing. Okay, so maybe you should introduce yourself first because I'm the host and I would feel bad if I start.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm Sam. I'm an ecologist and kind of a data scientist, a spatial data scientist. So I'm not really an air quality engineer of any type, but I have been kind of like a participant in this project for quite a while, and so I'm just going to be talking mainly about my participation and what it's like to use the app today, and kind of give that kind of perspective.
Thank you. So, and about me, I'm also not an indoor air quality scientist or anything, but at some point I realized there's no good app and project which um, just collects data from everyone, which is measured by portable CO2 monitors. So I just started building this website, this app. Was a lot of effort, and I was kind of naive when I started it, but that's just how it came to be, and people started using it, and now it's like I think the biggest public database of its kind, and still in its infancy. But we want to talk about why we are doing it, some interesting results we already have, and the future we are trying to achieve with this. And so I'll just start with my presentation now, and Sam will then at some point take over and talk about his data reports, which he generates from the data, and then in the end we'll just have some question answer session from whatever question you have. So just write them in the chat and we'll try to answer them. And if we can't answer them immediately, if you contact us in a way which we can reach out to you later, then we can also try to answer that later. Okay, so basically just some general information at start. I'll provide an extended version of these slides within 2 weeks, which will have a few more references, maybe a few more charts, a bit more polished, a bit less spelling errors, and yeah, as I just already said, there will be a question and answer session. So maybe let's start with the most important thing. Why is indoor air quality even important? Because if it's not important, we shouldn't waste any time on it. But one of the things which most people don't actively think about because it's just happening in our everyday lives is that we spend almost all of our day indoors. There's some variation, obviously, depending on country, depending on rural, urban environment, depending on your personal job, etc. But in average, it's around 90% of your time you spend indoors. It's like 80, 83, 85% in buildings, and then there's 5 to 7% in public transit or also in your own cars. And so this study, which did it really in detail, is from 2011. Sorry, the No, it's from, I think it's 2011, and my source on the bottom is wrong. Sorry, I'll correct that. So by now it might even be a bit higher, but that's a rough ballpark. And when we are indoors, we are constantly exposed to a lot of pollutants that we inhale, which can cause serious health issues. Obviously, if you are outdoors, there's also some kind of air pollution which you inhale, because outdoor air pollution, mainly from combustion, is a thing, also from car traffic. But if you are indoors, there is obviously the outdoor air which you get indoors, which is going to be a source of pollutants, but there are also pollutants which are generated indoors. There could be particulate matter from cooking, for example, or also if you have candles inside. There are volatile organic compounds. It could be from paint or other like furnitures and which you inhale. Then there's the big topic of infectious respiratory particles, which are mainly exhaled from humans, from other people in your rooms, or from yourself. Also from animals in some rarer situations. And there's also obviously a lot of more pollutants indoors. There's mold and allergens. There's gaseous pollutants, ozone, radon, which is a big topic, especially in some locations like the Alps. And generally, the state of the affair in most countries is that food, water, and outdoor air quality is strictly regulated. Obviously not perfect, but there's a lot of controls, a lot of monitoring, lots of regulation, which really is actually, like, if you don't comply to it, there are some penalties. But when it comes to indoor air quality, there are, for once, less regulations. If there are regulations, they are often not very strict, and they are not really like enforced, because they are also badly monitored. So, and then the second question is, so maybe let's go back. So this project focuses on CO2, which is mainly important when it comes to infectious respiratory diseases. That doesn't mean that particulate matter isn't important. There are estimates that around 5 million people each year die early from particulate matter. Mostly it's a practical reason, because with mobile sensors you can't really measure them very well, because while CO2 is a gas, so it permeates very well through clothing, and you have it in a bag or in your trousers. With particulate matter, you can't really have the sensor concealed. You need to have it in the open. And this is pretty unpractical if you're going somewhere. So this is mostly a matter for stationary sensors, while this project so far focused mostly on mobile sensors. And that's the reason. It's not because CO2 is important and particulate matter isn't. So why is CO2 important? First, CO2 in itself is harmless in the usual concentrations which you experience in buildings. If it's higher than 20 to 30,000, you can really can become a health hazard of its own. If it's like at 50,000, you can even die from it. But usually that's no values which you reach from normal conditions. That can happen in industrial accidents. It can also happen in some cave systems, but not in our everyday life. However, CO2 is a very good indicator about the amount of rebreathed air. That means air which has been in lungs of someone else just recently. And so we have an atmospheric baseline of around 225 ppm, rising because we still burn fossil fuels, which causes some other problems. However, every 400 ppm above this baseline means around 1% of the air which you inhale with every breath has been in the lungs of someone else in the room. Because exhaled air has 40,000 ppm, so if you're in a room with 10,000 ppm, which is astonishing bad, around 25% or 24%. of the air would have been in someone else. We've actually had some isolated measurements which has been so high. Then it's important because it correlates with the rebreathed air. That means that the amount of infectious respiratory particles very strongly correlate with the CO2 levels. It's, however, important that this only is the case if the circumstances are the same, because depending on what you do, you exhale more or less infectious respiratory particles. If you are singing very loudly, you can exhale like 100 times more of these particles than if you are just sitting quietly in a cinema. So even at a high level of CO2, there can be areas which for long range transmission are safer than good ventilated other buildings where there's just very loud activity. So that's important. So you can't just look at the CO2 levels and compare completely different buildings with different activities, but you can very good compare similar buildings. Like if you have a low CO2 museum and a high CO2 museum, those are comparable. And then there's also a effect which like amplifies high CO2 levels, is that high CO2 levels also can decrease the decay of at least some viruses. So this has been shown for some variants of COVID-19 that it massively increases the time which those viruses can stay infectious in the air. So it just like high CO2 level for these viruses not only means there's more infectious respiratory particles, it also means they survive longer. So it multiplies. And then moving away from the infectious diseases, there's also a lot of studies which show that people lose concentration and mental capacity performance if there's high CO2 values. It's still to some extent unclear if it's really CO2 which causes it or just correlation with other air pollutants which increase if you have bad ventilation, because there are some studies which just injected additional CO2 in a room which is otherwise well ventilated. And in this case, this didn't reduce the performance. But those are still, most of those studies aren't that big. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but overall, it means even if it's not CO2 which causes it directly, it would be just like for the infectious respiratory particles, be a proxy value to see, okay, we have bad ventilation. And so improving it, even if it's not the cause, would still apply. Only difference would be in this case, maybe filtration would be a better alternative if it's CO2 directly. Obviously, if you have rooms where other CO2 sources are present, that's what I just told about this 1% per 400 ppm doesn't apply. If there's dry ice, which can happen in music venues, or if there's a lot of candles, which can happen in restaurants, you would need to calculate and just reduce it by this amount, which might be not trivial because you don't know the details. But in almost all buildings and enclosed spaces, this holds. So let's talk about existing academic research. If you look at the literature, you notice that most studies measuring CO2 in indoors target residential homes, schools, museums, hospitals, or other publicly owned buildings, because it's a lot easier to gain permissions there if it's publicly owned or if it's like private homes than if you run into a business. And it's just a lot of effort to place sensors in a lot of different privately owned businesses with different owners. It's logistically hard, and also the owners don't really have a lot of incentive to allow this. And then it risks those who allow it are probably those who have good values who have a selection bias. And it's still nonetheless very important to have those studies, because getting values from schools is super important, because we have like our children are important and we have a lot of children and they spend a lot of time there, and So on the right side, you see a big study done in Austria, or chart of it, done by Professor Hopfer and Professor McLeod. And there you can see values, especially in the winter, which are really high, 3,000, 4,000 ppm, even the median at 1,500 ppm. Also shows that schools which have mechanical ventilation are systematically better, especially in the colder months. And so we have this really thorough and detailed academic research, which is, however, practically limited to a certain subset of indoor buildings. And so the idea behind this project was, can we complement this with an approach which can target those private properties? And that's what I'm going to talk about. So basically, Indoor CO2 Map is a crowd data collection project using mobile sensors to collect the CO2 measurement data in all kinds of different locations. It's open source, it's open data. The app is on GitHub, the web page is on GitHub. The backend will be on GitHub once I made it fully reproducible. And there's also just JSON, which has also open data, which is like also collected data and it's updated every few hours. So I'll talk about how does the app work, what is purpose, advantages, challenges. We'll take a look at some results and also at the next steps. So this is a quick overview about how the app works. Sam will show it later as well. So the idea is you go somewhere, it can be a supermarket, restaurant, whatever. You open your app. You need to have a sensor with you. Currently, those four are supported, which are shown here: the AeroNet, Everland, Inkbird, IMT1, and the AirSpot Health. And then you start the app. You select the location you are at. You press a button. You record for at least 5 minutes. Can be way longer, can be hours long. And then you press submit data and it shows up on the web page. The app is as privacy friendly as possible. You need no registration. The user initiates the data transmission. So there's no passive collection of your data all the time. It's just whenever you start a recording, it's transmitted. And in total, we have around 22,000 time series recorded so far. Most of it in buildings, I think around 18,000 and 4,000 in public transit. And just to show some hotspots of cities where there are really many measurements, there's Vienna, which is a #1 position globally, which has around 1,500 measurements. So you can see, especially the inner city is really crowded with all those markers. So when you go there and want to go to a museum or restaurant which has good air quality, you can probably look at this data and find something. Berlin with around 1,000 measurements, also pretty strong. But outside of Germany, there's also some hotspots. So we have the small town of Woodbridge, which I think has around 5,000 inhabitants. But someone measured a lot there. So he basically went down Main Street, measured almost every shop there, and even did it 2 or 3 times over the course of like more than a year. Then Den Haag in the Netherlands has around 300 measurements, and the Bay Area in the United States has around 50% of the total measurements taken in the USA. So far, it's mostly a German-speaking users which use the app very actively. What you can see here is the measurements per 1 million inhabitants. And Austria is even more active than Germany. And third place is Switzerland, which also has a large German-speaking part, while USA is around 60 times less activities than Austria. So if USA were as active as Austria is already, you would have 75,000 measurements in the USA alone. So it's mostly because I guess I'm from Germany and a lot of my connections are to German people. And I've always written about it in English from the start, but nonetheless, it's just a German community which picked up most on it so far, and I hope this will change over time. So let's talk a bit about what we all can do with this data. So the idea is, first of all, to get a data set which is large enough to get a really representative sample, even if you might need do some post-processing to create representativity. And then taking a look at the data and to find difference between countries, different between location types, brands, between types of buildings, maybe also time of year, between time of day, between days. There's a lot of things, but the more detailed you get, the more data you need to keep it somewhat informative, because you need a big sample size. Then you can also, if you find some outliers, it could be like a starting point for more thorough academic research, where you go more in depth after we found it in this public data set. It could be used as input parameter for epidemiological studies, where you just use this for some agent-based modeling, and okay, so schools have this values and shops have this values, and we have so many people who go there, and then you can sort of try to simulate where infections might happen. By having actual values about the current state of indoor air quality, it should also be possible to calculate how expensive it would be to improve ventilation, and how the GHG emissions would change, or the energy demand and the cost for it. And also because we see already that they are, at least for all types of buildings, they are buildings with good air quality. It also already indicates that it can't be cost prohibitive to do it, because then those businesses wouldn't exist. They would be bankrupt. And it's also, just by having this data, individuals can just make more informed decisions. They can take a look at the map and see, okay, such restaurants have good values, I might risk eating there, or there are many supermarkets nearby, and it don't really matter which I go to, so I might just as well go to the one which is best ventilated. So, and the larger goal behind it is actually to raise awareness that exposure to infectious particles is a negative externality caused by human interaction. Human interaction is good, but we need to be aware that it comes as a cost, and adapted social cost of infectious dose, similar to the social cost of carbon. And so the goal shouldn't be to not meet people anymore, but the goal should be to mitigate the social cost by improving ventilation or filtration. Let's quickly talk about some advantages of this approach. I already did a bit earlier. So basically, it's pretty cheap. Obviously, people need those sensors, but a lot of people have those sensors already. So from a project owner and initiator point of view, it's really cheap. It's decentralized, low maintenance, low cost. It's like running the servers is like 40 euros per month. It's open source, so there is opportunity to improve it, opportunity to take it over if I just lose interested in it. It's long running, so we can see those seasonal patterns, temperature related patterns. And we don't need legal permission. Unlike if you install a stationary sensor, you need to talk to the owners to do it. But with mobile sensors, you can, if you are there, you can just record it. And I talked to lawyers if that's really legal, or if I could get in trouble for doing it. And they were like, it's fine, at least in Germany. So obviously there might be some countries where there might be conflicts, but so far nothing happens. And unlike with stationary sensors, where you might not be allowed to install it in places where they know they have bad air quality, this avoids the subject bias to some extent, because people will record bad values if they encounter them. They won't just ignore them. However, on the other hand, people might know their bad values and not go there at all. So this is still a risk of bias. And yeah, by generating this data set, I hope also just general awareness about this topic raises. And there obviously are also some disadvantages of this approach. Obviously, CO2 levels change a lot over time, depending on situation, and those recordings are just small time spans, so just snapshots. Sensors might be miscalibrated, however, people would usually notice it, and also in the data set it would stand out. So there might be some data entry errors if people select not the shops they are really in, but one close by, because GPS is not so accurate that we can completely pinpoint it, and people need to, manually select it from a pre-selected list. Then there's a issue that sensors usually take some time to adjust for the environment. This is mitigated by requiring at least 5 minutes of recording so we can take a look at the data if it's stable. There might be malicious users which intentionally submit bad data. This can also happen in professional academic context where also data gets forged. So it's an issue, but that's not unique. Obviously, an issue is to actually gain enough users so we get really good data and lots of it. And then the selection bias where people might avoid certain locations where they know it's bad air and so they don't get recorded at all, and the data we get looks better than the reality really does. And overall, the app users might not behave like the general population, so it might be skewed towards certain kinds of location. Looking at the data, we can see very strong differences between different types of building in average, but also a big difference between the same categories. Most data so far is from Germany, so data is always a bit skewed to what Germany results, and it might look different in other countries. But overall, do-it-yourself shops, fast food, and museums have mostly good values, and even the bad ones. The very bad ones can be bad, but they are rare, while supermarkets often have bad values, and sadly doctors' offices as well, which is especially a problem because people in doctors' offices are more than an average sick, either with a respiratory disease or with something which makes them vulnerable to respiratory diseases. So this is a big issue. If you think about it, there's all those waiting rooms where lots of people are in them. At least in Germany, a lot of them are just in residential buildings. There's no mechanical ventilation systems. Germany doesn't really have any regulation when it comes to air quality. So this is just a result of it. And then you have also categories like churches where it's a gigantic spread because sometimes people measure there when it's just nothing going on, but sometimes it's also a concert. So in a concert is obviously like 100 times as many people in there than in an empty church. So that is also always a bit context dependent. And looking just at German supermarkets, we see that 60% of them have below 1000 ppm on average, around 30% even below 800 ppm. However, 12% have ppm higher than 1400, which is twice as many as if you just take a look at the supermarkets outside of Germany. And if you then would take just not Austrian and Swiss supermarkets, might be even lower. Then there's also a thing we noticed, which we'll talk a bit later, is that inside shopping malls, so supermarkets usually have better values because they very often share ventilation with other shops. And for example, shoe stores have better ventilation because if they don't have good ventilation, it just smells. And if it smells, they won't have customers. So it's not good ventilation because of any considerations when it comes to healthcare. but it's just capitalism in a way. They want to sell shoes, and for that they need good ventilation. And there's also large differences between German supermarket different brands. Obviously, there's a big spread in the same brand of supermarkets, but there's still a pattern where usually the discounters have higher CO2 values than the more expensive full service supermarkets. However, you can also, especially for the large chains, compare two different supermarkets which are exactly the same building, just placed somewhere else. And one might have perfect air quality and the other might have be at 2500 ppm. So it's sort of random, and it indicates that like just the owners don't care so much about it, and it's not so cheap or so expensive to do it either way. And because the benefits are hidden and indirect, they just don't care about it. And here is a chart which shows the difference between a few different brands by separated if it's a mall or if it's a normal supermarket building. And so in the middle, it's the malls, and you can see that those values are for all different brands are better than for the typical supermarket buildings, like those standalone supermarket buildings. There are for some also outliers which are not so great, but overall it's still a lot better. Then we have some locations which have been measured a lot, and there you can see quite a few different patterns. There are some stores which just always have very good values. Like on the left, the highest value is around 600, and it spreads like sometimes even lower, but it's all very good. Then you have some stores which mostly have bad values or either even very bad values, but sometimes they have good values. And for this specific supermarkets, one I measured a lot, you can see from the outside if the ventilation is running or not. And if it's running, in both cases, it was values which were around 600. And if it's not running and those outlet is closed, you can see it's like 1,500 or even higher. And then there's also markets which just are all over the place. Might depend on the time of day, but in general, the pattern is that places which in average have bad air quality vary a lot, while places which have good quality vary a lot less. Because they probably regulate their ventilation based on CO2 or some other measures, while for those which allow bad air quality, it's just more random depending on occupancy and doors, windows open, weather, whatever. And yeah, coming pretty much to the end already of my part before Sam takes over. Let's just quickly talk about some next steps. So one thing I'm going to add is support for stationary sensors. Hopefully some restaurants, doctors, museums, etc. might transmit data to the map so we can see it there. Obviously with the advantage having live data, with the disadvantage those who will participate won't be representative. So far I tested it with a few different sensors, and it's a lot easier to support them as long as they just can send data via HTTP or MQTT. Then integrating lots of different types is technically easy. I'm also in process of rewriting the mobile app so it becomes more modular, which means it's easier for other programmers to contribute, easier to add new features. You will be able to export your own local history of your own recordings, and then also can import it back to other phones if you want. There are lots of small improvements. You can sort by distance and name. You can search uh, by building. You can type, so it filters out the names. And there will be also the possibility to update the lists of building types which are displayed. So basically the app doesn't show everything, it just shows a certain type of categories of buildings. So it doesn't show offices, it doesn't show homes, it doesn't show lots of outdoor locations, but these lists are not perfect, and so we need to update it. And so far, we also need to update the app, and in the future, it just loads it from a file without an actual update. There will be visual improvements, improvement of the transit recording mode. And the third thing I want to do more this year is community events, which means just meeting up in different cities with people who already use the app or are generally interested in good indoor air quality. Want to introduce a monthly measurement day with different topics. I want to do it between March and October, so to avoid the winter months where respiratory diseases are really high, because I don't want anyone to get infected. And I'm open for more ideas. And just to quickly wrap it up, overall it's still in proof of concept stage, but I think it already shown in general it's viable to do it this way. It would be cool to get some independent validation of the results, like if academics would take some small samples of the data and compare to their own measurements, which they might do in the same city, and check if it's consistent. Yeah, increasing the user base is a big task I'm trying to do, and it's not my strongest aspect. So yeah. And overall, it's set up in a way that's self-sustainable. I always invite collaborations if someone wants to contribute. Very happy to talk to you. Yeah, as I said, the source code is on GitHub. The website you already know. It's in the App Store for Android and iOS. I'll also make an APK available for those who don't want to use Google and maybe other app stores in the future. You can follow me on Blue Sky, where I write about this, but also about energy and climate, which is my actual job. And if you want to financially support, there's also GoFundMe, but the most important thing to support this project really is just measure data. Now I'm giving the word to Sam.
Excellent. Cool. Shout if you can't see my slides or hear me or anything like that.
It should be, yes, I can hear you, and the slides should be visible now.
Great. Yeah, so I've been a long time like user of this app, and so I'm here today to actually just talk about like what it's like to be a user. I've been using it for 1.5 years, I think, and then more recently I've spent a lot of time doing some data analysis of what we've got so far, and so I kind of want to share what we've seen and what we've been doing essentially. So yeah, so let's start as the experience as a participant, what it's like to actually use it. And so so there have been quite a lot of different types of users that we've had so far. The app doesn't collect much user data or anything, so we don't actually know much about who uses these things, but we've been able to make a good few guesses, and so I'm going to tell you about those. So I think the main category of people who contribute data are probably kind of more casual users, and they do like maybe 1 or 2 observations a month, and it's just based on like they're going to the grocery store, and so they submit an observation while they're at the grocery store, and they don't really go out of their way to do anything, and they only do a few measurements a month. And those users have been really instrumental in kind of getting these like long-term data sets for different communities that are really useful to us. There are also a good few people who are kind of like power users essentially, and they actually go out of their way to do observations. So they enjoy it so much that they're deciding to go to a store that they have no intention of ever going into usually, but they go in and they do an observation just for the fun of it, or to contribute to the data set. And those users are also really, really important, and they give us kind of this very broad overview of the nature of CO2 in a city, which is really cool. And I've done a bit of both of those two things, and they're both very fun and very rewarding to do. Actually, I really enjoy working on this project. So I've just made some animations of how it is to actually do a recording for this app. Um, it's kind of a little bit confusing, but so you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, that's me doing an observation of a store called Welcome in London. And then on the right-hand side, it's me doing a recording of an underground train for a transit measurement. And we have building measurements and transit measurements in this data set. And yeah, they're pretty fun to do, but it can be a little bit tricky the first time you use the app to actually figure out what's going on and how to use it. But once you kind of do a couple of successful measurements, it's actually not that hard, and it becomes kind of second nature to do. The main thing, of course, is that you have to own a CO2 monitor already and then be able to connect to it using your phone. But yeah, it becomes intuitive once you use it. So yeah, that's kind of that's my first part of the talk. It's just, how it is to use it and everything. But now I'm going to kind of move into the data analysis side. And so I think we've mentioned already that I'm a data scientist in my day job. And so when I found out that this project had an open data set, I was really excited to be able to build off of what there is already and use the data for my own pleasure and kind of help friends through it and everything. And so it's quite easy to go onto the website and just download like a CSV of the data and do what you want with it. But I found that a little bit limiting. And so one of the first things that I did when I was starting out was to write an R package that allows you to pull in the data really quickly and use it in a reproducible manner. And that's been really, really useful to me personally. And I don't know if anyone else has ever used it, but I highly encourage anyone to use it if they want to. It's it's pretty easy to use if you know how to use R and if you like using R. It's definitely not for for people who don't, and that's totally okay. But so if you do want to install the package, it's just one line of R code to do it, and you can see that on the screen. And then if you want to actually download the data and get it useful for you, it's just one of these two lines. So the first line that I'm showing of code is pulls in all the building data, and the second line pulls in all the transit data, and you can use it however you want from there. And so that having that R package has kind of allowed us to build in a lot more analysis ability in the project, essentially. And so I've been able to create a monthly auto-generated report based on the data. And so that's all that is this one website that kind of just every month pulls all the data and creates a whole bunch of figures and statistics and things to show people of how the project is going and what the last month was like. And so that can be pretty fun, and it seems to work really, really well. I'll be going into, in just a moment, I'll actually be going into a lot of these graphs that I'm showing, but that's kind of the infrastructure that we've been building that has allowed us to do these kind of things. So yeah, I'd like to talk now about what we've actually been learning from these data so far. And the first thing I need to mention is that there is a huge spatial bias. It's already been mentioned, but like the majority of users have been in Austria and Germany. And you can see here, this is an animation over time of the project and where all the observations have been. And you can see that it's mainly been based around Germany and Austria and Western Europe. And then quite recently, we've had a few users pop up in the United States, which have been really useful. And it's only zoomed in to these three locations because around the rest of the world, we really don't have much data at all. And especially in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, we really don't have any observations at all. And so it's, as it hopefully becomes more popular, it'd be really good for us to to get a better picture of the world, because lots of building regulations and everything, they are usually based on a national scale, and so borders actually matter in this case, and it would be kind of inappropriate for us to draw conclusions about the world based on a data set that is heavily biased towards Western Europe. And you can see that here again, like Germany and Austria have far more observations than any of the other countries, and we have quite a long tail of countries that have only one or two observations. And then obviously there's loads and loads of places that don't have any at all. And you can see that here again, if you just want to zoom into the top 11 countries, you can see that most of the observations we have so far are based on buildings. And we do have a few transit measurements, which are ones where someone has recorded the CO2 in a bus or a train or something as they go on their morning commute or something like that. And so some countries are actually have a lot more of those than others. So the United States of America is a little bit of a stereotype, but there's not much transit data at all in the US, whereas Austria, for instance, it's actually nearly a third of their observations, or more than a third of their observations are transit ones, which is really interesting stuff. And it's been mentioned already, but Austria has a much per capita or per million people, they're contributing 400 observations per person, whereas the rest of the world is nowhere close to that yet. But we'll get there. I'm looking forward to it. So then, yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about how we can use these data and what it's useful for. And so the first kind of use is on like a hyper-local scale. People can use them just if they want to like figure out what supermarket has the best air quality in their neighborhood. And so you use this app to just go to all the different supermarkets, do a recording in each, and then you can see quite easily which is the best one, and then you can just go there forever as your favorite supermarket or something like that. And so that's like a very hyper local scale, but it's a really legitimate use for people to use it for. We can also think about it on kind of like a town level. And so, as was mentioned before, the town of Woodbridge in the United Kingdom has a lot of observations. And that's because it's where my mother actually lives. And so every time that I go and visit, I try to do an observation in as many different places as possible so that in the town, so that I get kind of like a good data set over time. And so you can see here, this is the high street in Woodbridge, and I've tried to get every store with a few exceptions along the way. And so that can be used again on this like very local scale for people to just choose which is their favorite, cafe to go to, right? Would you make the decision to go to Costa here, which has a mean CO2 level of 2,300, which is quite high, or would you go to one of the other? I can't see. Oh, I didn't do any other cafes. Oh well, forget about that. But maybe there's another cafe that. Oh no, I did. Here we go. Cafe Nero, which is actually much lower. It's still not great. 1,000 ppm is very bad. And I should say, just so the goal for this good air quality is as close to 400 ppm as possible. Anything higher is like not getting as ventilated. And generally a good rule of thumb is to like keep things up under 800 ppm. That's a good place. But Cafe Nero here is lower than Costa, so I would probably choose to go to the Cafe Nero. So it can be useful on that very local scale, but also we can look at it as like, we can look at all the stores in Woodbridge at the same time. And so on this graph here, I've shown the CO2 levels, the median CO2 levels on the y-axis, and then I've shown all the different stores in Woodbridge on the x-axis, and then the colors represent the season. And so a measurement in the summertime is brown, and a measurement in the wintertime is green. And so you can see here that a lot of them are very consistent throughout the seasons, but quite a few have a big difference where in the wintertime the CO2 is much higher. And that is probably because we're closing windows and doors and things like that to keep it warmer inside, which makes sense. Whereas in the summer, people sometimes keep their windows open, it ventilates the place a bit more. And so we actually collect the data on whether a window or door is open. And if you put that on the graph, here I've changed it so that now green things represent a window or a door is open, whereas a brown represents it's closed. And you can see here that very consistently, if the store has a window open or a door open, then they're actually quite well ventilated. And so you can use kind of these sets of data to talk to the store owners and just say, hey, like you can actually take care of your, your workers and your customers quite well by just leaving the window open if you want to. And if that's not available, there are some places with actually no windows at all. Then maybe you can add an air filter or something like that, which can help as well. And so these kind of things can be brought to like local councils and things where maybe they can find funding for those sorts of things, and it can be used on this kind of community scale, which I think is really cool. Then it's already been kind of mentioned, but we can do comparisons of brands, and this is getting to kind of like a whole country scale. And so we've already mentioned that Aldi and Lidl are quite consistently high CO2, so they are consistently not ventilated very well. And it's also it's also been mentioned to us. I heard from some people in Discord that in the United States they've been finding that Costco has much higher levels of CO2 than the Home Depot. And so we were able to just pull out a quick graph of Costco versus the Home Depot. And as you know, we don't actually have that many observations in the United States yet. And so the Home Depot, we only had 5 observations. But you can see that Costco does seem to have a consistently higher or a less efficient ventilation. And if you add IKEA into that at the same time, because we do have a lot of observations of IKEA, then you can see that Costco is definitely making kind of a conscious choice to have less ventilation than IKEA, which is kind of like a very similar, like all of these stores are kind of big warehouses essentially. Yeah, so these data can be used for us to like talk to the management systems of the stores, and so they can actually make like huge management decisions around the whole country, and those can benefit a lot of people, which I think is really, really cool. And then lastly, you can use this data for kind of like whole, international levels of large scale analyses. So this is just me using a histogram of the mean CO2 levels per observation of every observation in the world. And so essentially what you would like is for as many of those observations to be to the left on on this graph. You want them to be under 800 ppm. And so what we can see here is actually the red line shows the median value, which is the middle value, or the middle value. And so it shows that more than 50% of the observations are below 770 ppm. And that's actually a really good sign, because our goal is to keep it kind of around there. And so it kind of shows us that we really only need to focus on these really, really high level ones, right? To have quite a strong impact. So the things that are sitting around 3000 ppm, like there needs to be some change there. But like a lot of places in the world actually are probably okay. And so we don't have to like make huge changes to the world to to get people with cleaner air. You can also break a lot of these things down into different kind of like building types and things like that. If you're not familiar with a box plot, which is what this is here, essentially the thick bar in the middle of these boxes shows the median value. And so you would want that thick bar to be as low as possible on this graph. And so what we can see is that supermarkets generally have a higher median value than the other types of buildings. And that is probably an effect of seasonality. And I'll show you that right here. So here we've got a graph that shows some lowest curves, which are their curves fitted to the median value of the CO2. Again, you want things to be as low as possible. You want things on the y-axis to be as close to 400 ppm. And so if you look at this, and then on the x-axis, I'm graphing the week of the year. And so what this means is anything on the left-hand side of the graph or the right-hand side of the graph are in the wintertime, and then things in the middle are in the summer months. And so what this shows is that supermarkets, which are the red line, are very, very consistent throughout the year. There's not a lot of variability in the amount of ventilation that is going on. Whereas the cafes and the chemists and the restaurants are actually having this, and the fast food restaurants especially, are having kind of much higher CO2 levels in the winter months and then lower levels in the summer months. And that kind of confirms what we believe, is that a lot of these shops and things, they open a door or a window in the summertime to increase ventilation, make it more inviting, and so that lowers the CO2. Whereas supermarkets, which often have these like automatic doors or something, and are often bigger, have very, very consistent CO2. I should say that I am not I am not an expert in time series analysis. So if you know how to do this better, please tell me, because I would love to make these better a little bit. Yeah, and so the last thing I'm going to talk about is the transit measurements, which we haven't really addressed very much. Like, those were only added to the project about a year ago, and because they're movement data, they're a lot more complicated to analyze than these stationary building observations. And so we haven't done a lot of work into them yet, because we need to clean them up quite a lot. But here's kind of a preview graph, I'll say, that shows kind of again, a box plot showing the general distribution of each different type of transit type that we record. And so you can see trains, which are on the right-hand side, they are consistently a little bit higher than the other types of transport. And that's probably because trains, especially long distance trains, often go for hours without opening their doors or something like that, right? Between stops, they're going to keep them closed. And so they rely entirely on the mechanical ventilation that's built into the train. Whereas with other types of transit, like a bus, for instance, they might stop and open their doors every couple of minutes or something. And so that has an effect. Also, buses and some trains, of course, do have open windows, but a lot of buses do have open windows that increase the ventilation. But yeah, so I would like to stress again that this project is in its infancy. We really only have strong data for a few places, and we really need a lot more. And so anything that I've said here is you should take it with a grain of salt. And but I think you can kind of think about this as kind of like a preview of what we may be able to learn from this project in the future, that could be really, really exciting and really useful to people. And so I'm kind of going to finish up with that. I'll just say, if you want to keep up to date with all these things, you can definitely look at the monthly report that we generate. The report for January is going to come up tonight or tomorrow, probably, and you can find that at the link at the top. And then, obviously, if you're someone who's familiar with R and data science, please use the package I've created. And please contribute to it if you want to. And then other than that, like, you should join our Discord maybe. If you want to keep up to date with a lot of the interesting insights that we've been seeing. We often talk about like the cool observations that show up around the world all the time, which is a lot of fun. And with that, I'm going to hand it back.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so let's change back to the overview. If you stop screen sharing, people will see your face again. Yeah, nice. Okay, so maybe let's just go over the question people had. So first question was about having an historic average of the spaces to mitigate the transitionary nature of the measurements. So this is already done on the map. So the color of the pins on the map is a average of the average of multiple recordings. You can also filter by date. And then if you do this, it also only for the map representation of the colors of the pin also only uses this time span. So if you say, I don't care what it was like 2 years ago, I only care about data from the past 6 months, you can change it on the web page. And for more in-depth analysis, you can also download the data set and run your own analysis for it. So that's already done. Then we have a bunch of questions from Marcos Marado. So first is a connection with OpenStreetMap. So there already is a connection one way because the app uses OpenStreetMap data to identify the buildings, and all locations are also geolocated using OpenStreetMap data. I'm not sure if OpenStreetMap allows transitionary data to be included in the main data set because it's not permanent. Like you measure CO2 and 10 minutes later it's going to be other values. So it's not geodata in a way. It's geodata associated environmental data. So I'm not sure if there is a way to directly connect it to OpenStreetMaps in a way beyond that all those measurements already have the node or ways or relations with identifiers associated to them. Then second one is connect the data to Wikidata. I have no experience with Wikidata, but if they take such data repositories, I'll take a look at this. Then we have community events, especially cross events or cross communities. I guess it could be something like working together with, maybe it could be manga conventions, it could be geoguesses or geocaches or something. So that's exciting idea because people who might already collect other kinds of data might be more inclined to also include this. So that's definitely a fun idea to check out if we can do something like that. Then putting the Android app on F-Droid, I plan to do that in the longer term. Like the current app uses one package which isn't open source. It's free to use for non-commercial, but strictly it's not something which is allowed on F-Droid. The rewrite of the app avoids this. So then it's completely open source. We can put it there. I'm not sure how much effort it is. So if someone is there who wants to support it and just uses the APK to put it there, I'm happy to do that. Then the third one, what else do we have? Then we have, let's see. Is it possible to contribute data without an Android iOS device? Well, if you have no, currently not really. Like, at least not with mobile sensors. I plan to have like the stationary sensors that send data permanently. Then if you have data on something which isn't a residential home because we don't want to collect data from residential homes, then you could contribute, but for mobile data, currently not. I mean, I could look into supporting Linux phones or something, but it's really, it's a super small niche, and my time sadly is limited. So I'm happy if someone wants to write a port of it, because generally this framework I use for it should also run on Linux, I think. So it could work on, yeah, whatever Linux distributions there are on phones. But without phones, so one of the core ideas of this app is to really not allow data recorded earlier and in another location, to really enforce people to be in the location where they're recording to increase the quality of the data. There's obviously always going to be loopholes and workarounds and malicious users. We can still do it if they're committed enough, but it reduces accidental errors and increases the burden. So that's something I will commit to do this. There are other projects where you can upload data just collected with ARINet and upload some XDFI or CSV. For this project, I won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, the AirSpot does a project that allows manual recordings, doesn't it? And so I think that's a really good place to send those if people are not using devices that are compatible with this, or if they have historical data.
Yeah.
You've got another question about someone's asking, will you support the SmartAir CO2 one that's not the Qingpin? SmartAir CO2 monitor,
yeah.
not the Qingpin, the bigger one.
Okay, but isn't there SmartAir? Wait, which is not. If you send me which model exactly you mean, or I can take a look at it. So basically, SmartAir also uses Qingping just rebranded, and I try to support it, but sadly it doesn't really seem to send the data via Bluetooth. So it sends a lot of stuff via Bluetooth, but apparently not the CO2 values, at least not non-encrypted. But yeah, take a look into that.
Yeah, it's too bad because that is a very popular sensor and a very cheap one, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so maybe a question is a way to put the amount of people there in a space or the store room. Right now there's a custom field where you can just enter text. In earlier versions we had like an occupancy slider, but the issue is that for a lot of locations it's hard to say if it's like low, medium, high occupancy, or even if you express it in percentage, because there's no set percentage or in locations. Like in a supermarket, it's pretty subjective. How many, like what is medium, what is very crowded. But what I want to do in the new app is to have context-aware additional fields which you optionally can enter for locations where it makes sense. For example, in a cinema or in a theater or other place where you have a set amount of seats. They are getting a guess it's like 80% or 50% or 20% is possible. So I want to display this for these locations, but not in supermarkets or other areas or museums where it's too subjective. So yeah.
Yeah, and then I wonder if we could maybe use another API that actually does measure like occupancy or something like that one day. Like lots of transit systems make kind of models of how full their buses are and things like that, as well as like Google has an API, I guess, that isn't open for predicting how full a store is, doesn't it?
I'm not sure how accurate that is. I think it's accurate in average, but I'm not sure if it's accurate for single locations.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
So I thought about like using just counting how many other Bluetooth devices or something like that is nearby and estimating from there, but that's maybe a bit intrusive and also not sure how accurate it would be, because then it also depends a lot on the model of the phone, how much others they find. So I decided against it. So
Okay, we've got one more question at the bottom here, asking for a friend. Could we add fields for other access info if people collect that? I'm assuming someone's thinking of like, um, is it like, do they have an access ramp or something like that outside, like ADA compliance? Correct me if I'm wrong for making that assumption about the question.
yeah, I'm also not quite sure what
Yeah.
access info is.
I do think that so there is the available field of notes that people can add, and lots of
Yeah.
people add all sorts of random things to their observations. I My guess is that you're not intending to support that thing because it's hard enough to just
Oh,
focus
yeah,
on what
but
we've already got.
I mean, OpenStreetMaps
Hmm.
has this. So what I think it's a good idea. So basically, there's someone else building an app which shows if a place has outdoor seating and stuff, and they also want to include my data. So um, maybe they could add to their app if it's wheelchair accessible, and then you could find this. Is this a wheelchair accessible location with good air? And this is probably nothing which I would do on the app, but which I think should be doable for the website. That we add, because if it's an OpenStreetMap, just grabbing this information about accessibility and gender neutral toilets is not much work. So we could add, that's a great idea. So
Yeah.
it's nothing I'm going to be able to do this month. So, but I'll put it on my list, and please follow up with me if it's not done by April. And so yeah, it would be on the website. It wouldn't be on the app, but on the website, then you can just please only show me locations which have good accessibility.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So give me a few seconds to write it down, because otherwise I'm completely going to forget it.
And I should also say that it's so that if you had it in this app, for instance, then you would kind of be doubling up on data that was being
Yes.
like it's already available in OpenStreetMap, so it doesn't need to be generally collected again. But in places that OpenStreetMap doesn't have it already, it would be good for people to be able to easily add that via another app or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess.
So that's also something I want to
Mm-hmm.
include in the new app. Is not an editor for OpenStreetMap, but like just an information. Okay, if there's something missing, you can use this app with a short explanation how to use it. So just to this is cross-community
Yeah.
approach in
Yeah.
a way to make it just inform people. Okay, this uses OpenStreetMap. Please use this app if you want to add this data.
Yeah, exactly. And Marcos is recommending Street Complete as as a really good app to add those sorts of things to OpenStreetMap. And I've used it before. It is very good.
Okay. If they want, I mean, my app is open source, so if they want to deal with also Bluetooth connection to the sensors, I would be happy.
Okay.
So
Are there any
is there,
last
yeah.
questions? Let's see.
Oh, there's one more thing maybe which isn't directly a question, but a statement, but it can be rephrased in a question. Is it if location in bigger stores changes the reading? Like if there's
Mm,
big differences between like
yeah.
entrance and if you're at the bakery, the bake.
Hmm.
So my observation in general is that at least in supermarkets, the values are almost everywhere the same, because CO2 is just a gas which mixes very well. Um, unless there's open windows or you are really close to the entrance area. But if you're like 5 or 10 meters away from the entrance, then it's going to be pretty much the same value than to 100, 150 meters away in the same big supermarket room.
Yeah, very true. Supermarkets are often very, very consistent. But yeah, I have noticed in museums there's a lot of difference. For instance, if you ever want to go to the Natural History Museum in London, depending on which exhibit you're in, there are huge differences. And I think they're very aware of it because some of them are very, very hot and they have these like extra fans they've added to the older buildings in which the different exhibits are in. And so that can be seen on these recordings. And it is interesting to think about how easy it would be to actually kind of have a field for which rooms you were in or something like that, maybe. But I think there's a lot of variability that we'd have to think about if we wanted to add that data.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd say let's conclude this for today. To everyone, thank you for showing up and all the questions, and feel free to just email me or write in Discord or on Blue Sky. And have a nice day, have a nice evening, and a good next week. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.